It's not just the geography or the complex culture that distinguishes South Asia from that of global North. With a total population of 1.8 billion and growing, the social and economic issues in the region need constant probe and review. Solving many of the developmental challenges in South Asia, these countries are in a catch-22 situation, balancing culture and tradition with developmental goals while also ensuring that the solutions are scalable and, more importantly, inclusive, sustainable, and climate-friendly.
Several actors can contribute to solving these challenges. Activists, researchers, scientists, and various civil society organizations contribute to finding solutions that are specific to the region's needs and aspirations. Policy research organizations or a think tank is one such actor that targets policy to bring about developmental changes.
Poverty, cross-cutting, governance, gender, these are all issues which are just not allowing this society to actually progress. There's no uplift which you can see, and the disparity is just increasing day by day. All the more a sense for the research think tanks to be there. So it is extremely important. These are the policy research organizations which are telling the government the doables. After every research, they are just giving them doable things which can be done to address the issues. What is going so wrong within the South Asian countries that we are not benefiting out of the research? Why the policy formulation is taking place without any evidence-based research? Why the policy formulation is taking place keeping into mind the immediate political gains?
Various think tanks across South Asia are aiming research at policy changes, from studying the impact of climate change to assessing a nation's energy requirement and providing doable policy recommendations. Think tanks are emerging as knowledge hubs to understand and solve pressing developmental challenges.
Public policies, as you know, are central to making the world a fairer, a better, a more equitable place. And public policies work best when they are informed by evidence, good quality evidence. Think tanks, as one actor who provide good quality evidence, are therefore central to making sure that public policies are well informed and they are very effective in changing the lives of millions of people. Based on this belief, we launched the program of Think Tank Initiative in 2009 in South Asia. The idea was to build a critical mass of think tanks who will then collectively not only produce good quality evidence for policy change, but also make efforts to ensure that good quality research is taken up in policy. It influences public policy. It changes the lives of people.
Think tanks have emerged as knowledge hubs responding to the needs of society at large, even in South Asia, although the ecosystem is still in its nascent stages here.
The Think Tank Initiative was the brainchild of the Hewlett Foundation, who saw an opportunity to really contribute to meeting the demand of governments around the world in 2008, who were increasingly seeing the value of bringing research-based evidence into policymaking and decision-making at the national level. And the Hewlett Foundation approached IDRC with the idea, given IDRC's history and relationships with many researchers around the Global South. And it was really on that basis that the idea germinated.
Think tanks began as semi-government funded or government-funded organizations, but are increasingly dependent on project funding. The lack of regular funding has been identified as the most critical factor impinging the autonomy of think tanks,
making them vulnerable to a donor-led research agenda. The initiative provided core funding with a comprehensive capacity development program in 3 key areas: research methods and skills, policy engagement and communications, and organizational effectiveness.
The think tanks in the cohort ranged across new promising think tanks with just a few researchers to legacy organizations looking for capacity building in specific areas.
We were just about a single-digit number of researchers in CSTEP when the TTI call came. And I remember we gave ourselves no chance. The process of submitting the application was incredibly useful because it forced us to think of a strategic plan for the organization. What do we want to be? What's our research aspirations? Now, to achieve those research aspirations, we have to build an organization. So we need a credible institutional mechanism in terms of our human resource processes, our finance processes, how we manage the grants, transparent processes for auditing. So we went through that discussions. How do we make sure our research is made available to the policymakers in a manner they can understand? So who will do that? So communication processes. So we went through this whole set of discussions which enabled us to frame a strategic plan for CSTEP. Now, if TTI had not been there at that point of time, we still might have done a strategic plan, but maybe in future. The IDRC application forced us to think of those crucial questions which are important for us. In that sense, I say with confidence, even if we had not got the TTI grant, that process of applying was incredibly useful to us to think through those crucial questions.
NCR today is a different institution than I think it was 6 or 7 years back. The biggest change I suspect that's happened is in terms of our vision of who we are and what we are, and most importantly how we fund ourselves. From being completely project driven to we have now received significant sources of funding where we are able to build longer programs of work which allow us to hire people and recruit talent for much longer periods of time. They have stability in what they do. We have much greater freedom in setting our own agenda. We are able to then decide how we want to best disseminate this information because we are in control of it. So I think this is the biggest change that's happened at NCR, led by the availability of core support.
Understanding the nascent ecosystem in South Asia, the initiative focused on building strong foundations for long-term sustenance of think tanks. This ensured that the think tanks were able to contribute to a larger political and developmental ecosystem in South Asia.
I think for us, the main collaborative efforts, learning has come from policy engagement and communications. That's not to say that we haven't learned on the research side. What we have learned is that there are new areas of research, new methodologies that other organizations are using, and importantly, the training component came in, methodological training under the organizational performance pillar, as well as soft skills communication training, and then the whole sort of institutional level system changes that we had done to monitor the research progress through time tracking systems and all of that, and of course on the communications level to go and meet the media, to meet the minister one-to-one meetings in order to get the research evidence out into the public domain. So in many ways, all of those threads came together.
I would say in terms of publication, the number has gone, tremendously gone high. The number of dialogues and other types of communications have also increased. Now we have adopted better and technologically advanced communication tools to, disseminate the outputs. And also the research division has expanded. We could recruit and retain, as I said. That's also true for the administration division. So the size has actually increased, and with the size, the amount of resources have also increased. Like, when we got TTI, it was 30% of our total budget. Now it's about 15 to 20%. So in terms of finance also, we could increase or expand over the years.
But what makes a good quality think tank? Is it the research they generate or the engagement they practice in order to influence policy changes?
From a policymaker's perspective, a good think tank will be an organization that produces good quality research, but not only that, it does so in a way that's accessible to the users of the research. that's produced in a timely manner, and that speaks to the kinds of agendas that governments may be dealing with at any particular moment. So it has to be relevant to the users of the research.
Let me first caveat this by saying that the art of policy making is complex. There is no linear relationship between work that we do and decisions that are taken in the policy landscape. Our role is to speak truth to power. Our role is to hold on to the value systems that we believe in, of providing high quality, rigorous scholarship and to interpret the issues of the day, and to ensure that we proactively share our interpretation with different stakeholders within the policy making community. Our contribution to sort of the world of idea generation has meant that often things that we've been working on, for instance, improving the efficacy of public finance management based on the work of fund tracking that we've done, it so happened that the policy making community also began to talk about that, and we were able to take our years of expertise built up to the table to say, this is what we've learned, and if you're thinking of streamlining fund flows in social sector programs, here's what we have learned in terms of how you can actually go about doing it. And I think it contributed to building a much more robust mechanism.
A significant poverty related policy engagement we were able to make over the last couple of years happened when the President of Sri Lanka wanted to declare last year, 2017, as the year of poverty alleviation. Before doing so, the President's office wanted CSTEP as a policy organization, research organization, to draft a basic document for the President to use it as a foundational document to do the announcement. So this document was also improvised into a bill, which was later turned into an act.
You know, the citizen engagement is a big part of a lot of the work that the think tanks we support do, and the better ones are ones who have invested in ways of building trust with the communities they work with.
After the earthquake, there was a lot of sort of arguments or sort of ideas about here is an opportunity for us to build integrated settlement. So what we did was to, we had this funding support, and then we started to do some community survey. We talked with people at different levels in the affected area, and then we prepared a radio program asking people about, what did they like, how do they want their settlements to become, how do they like their homes to become, and it was called Surakshit Thalo, secure place of living. And then we broadcasted it to about, all the 14 affected districts. And then what it did was to conceive of settlement in a very different way, not simply as physical houses of concrete or stone, but also as a living environment, you see. Some other partners, we were involved in preparing what's called National Strategy for Local Resilient Community. That required us to work with, all the municipality of Nepal. This was a national strategy we prepared for the government. It's at the final stages of being approved. So therefore, having that core funding allows us to experiment, allows us to, sort of push your boundary, allows us to leverage project funding, link that project funding to your larger strategy, and then respond to, some of the, pressing challenges.
There's growing concern and focus on gender-related issues.
Think tanks are expected to ensure that their work culture is cognizant of and addresses gender disparity.
This, in turn, is also reflected in gender-related research that think tanks are engaged in, whether in addressing issues of violence, sexual harassment at workplace, inclusivity in access to sanitation, or education.
What we're seeing when we look at all of our think tanks and how they're approaching gender in their research as well as their organizations is that for many of them, it's about social justice. So they're working on gender because it's the right thing to do. But in line with that, it's also essential to high quality research as well as sustainability. Donors are interested in hearing about what think tanks are doing around gender. And in order for research to be rigorous and rooted in local reality, it does need to consider the differentiated needs of men and women.
Think tanks are also part of the society where we live in, so they don't work in a vacuum. They're not over and above reflecting the social attitudes. Most think tanks in our cohort have a process in place for any kind of harassment based on gender, whether it's on the basis of your, of whether you're male or female, or also whether you're, on the basis of caste, class, race, comments made on that, or behavior indeed that shows there is some sort of discrimination. All our think tanks almost have systems in place to do this.
Think tanks face several challenges when it comes to funding, affecting both stability and independence of their research and their ability to go beyond research to influence change in policy.
As a cohort, the think tanks have some distance to go to convince the investors of their value proposition. That's my personal view. We need to do that extra effort to convince them that, look, we are a credible knowledge provider in giving evidence-based objective studies which enrich policy, and therefore you need to invest in them. Now, for example, in TTI, we are getting money from foreign philanthropies like Gates Foundation, like Hewlett Foundation, etc. So they are convinced about the need to invest in Indian think tanks. A similar effort has to be made to convince our Indian philanthropic institutions that you need to invest in institutions with a slightly longer term time for payback.
Governments are going to have to think through the whole question of financing knowledge systems. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they themselves are going to be the only ones to do that. There have been active conversations with domestic philanthropy and the private sector who are likely also going to have to play a role in helping to finance and facilitate research as a social good, in the same way that there's broader discussions around corporate social responsibility. What role can corporates play in helping ensure the research gets generated to address the policy challenges that it's in everybody's interest to solve and address.
The success of the think tank initiative and its model of co-funding is evident with organizational and developmental changes in the think tanks. All the think tanks in the TTI cohort have expanded to accommodate more funding and reduce the dependency on core support provided. This is the success of the think tank initiative.
What we know for sure through this experience of 10 years in the program is, one, core support works. It works beautifully, it works wonderfully for think tanks. Project grants, research grants cannot be a substitute to core support. That's the most important lesson, if you ask me, we have learned. Second thing we have learned is how leadership is critical to strengthening of think tanks, not only internally as an organization, but also institutionally, being more and more effective in the context in which they operate. Leadership and governance, critical. The third important lesson that we have learned is how it's important to engage across borders, engage across institutions, engage across boundaries, learn from each other, and become collectively more effective and collectively stronger. Sustainability cannot be attained overnight. Sustainability cannot be attained only through project grants. Sustainability, unfortunately, also cannot be attained until public monies get involved, until corporate philanthropists also get involved. So in a way, this is my appeal based on our experience and learning from the program to all of the stakeholders. It's important that think tanks are strengthened such that they can continue to play the very important role they are playing in the wider globalized context of the world today. We all have to play our role, and it's very important that these learnings are used and integrated in future program designs, not only of public agencies, but also of international donor community.
From expanding research areas to putting in place robust processes for quality and engagement, think tanks have demonstrated growth and brought changes to policy. The think tank initiative comes to an end in 2019.
However, thanks to the capacity building initiative of the TTI, think tanks in South Asia will continue to influence policy even as they renegotiate the funding space for their research.